This is Surly Grognards for Tuesday, September 18th, 2012. This is Peter Bowman, and I'm joined by my good friend Eric Carlson, as usual.
Hi
Eric,
guys,
yep.
what's up?
Yeah, just as a note, we're recording on Tuesdays from now on out, due to scheduling change that involves both, that Eric, in the Tuesday night game Eric and I both are in. It's moved to Monday nights, so we've had to shift Grognards to Tuesdays, so well, look for us if you want to watch us live. Watch us. We'll be recording on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. So, Eric, tonight we're going to be talking about the topic tonight, which was suggested to us by our good friend Kaz, Kremty in the chat. We're going to be discussing how to kill a PC. It's a little bit more nuanced than what the actual title is. We're going to be talking about difficulties in RPGs, and how to handle games where there's a lot of character death or very little. So we're talking about the role of death in an RPG for player characters, and possibly we'll touch a bit on sort of death of NPCs, but we're focusing more on how to handle death of player characters. As usual, we'll be talking for a while, and then at the end of the show, we'll have time for some questions. If you want to have your question answered, you can email us at surlygrognards@yahoo.com. That's surlygrognards@yahoo.com. Or if you've got a question, you can just ask in the chat, and we'll try to get to it at the end of the show. So, Eric, what are
Yes.
your thoughts on player character death in RPGs?
Um, necessary. Necessary asterisks. The threat of player character death needs to feel like a real thing in an RPG. But no one likes it when your character is killed because of some random bullshit, unless you're running a particularly grim game. If a player dies, it should be grand and heroic and serve a greater purpose in the story. You shouldn't be offed by some schmuck carrying a 38. On the other hand, the threat of death and horrible maiming needs to feel very real in every situation where it would feel very real in real life. Otherwise, it just doesn't carry the appropriate weight.
Yeah, I would actually, personally, I'd sort of generalize that a little bit more. For me, it's not so much the threat of death per se; it's the threat of failure. The threat
Death
of
is a kind of failure.
it is a kind of failure, but that's my point. Is there other kinds of failure that do not inherently involve death, especially not death of the player characters? And there are some games where death of the player characters isn't necessarily the paramount sort of failure that you actually are more worried about.
That's true.
As an example, off the top of my head, in general, the threat of death isn't really sort of the big sort of driving sort of threat of failure you'd see in, say, a superhero game. Well, there's a place for it there. It's more failing to save other people. That's more the big thing that you're worried about as a superhero. At least that's sort of
Yeah.
my take on it.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that.
That said,
But
there are times when the threat of death should be there.
yeah,
I mean,
and
obviously. Sorry, Eric.
that's the thing, that expanding the threat of death to the threat of failure is probably a more apt description, because sometimes, like, yes, I saved everybody. I'm dead at the time, but I got everyone out. So,
Right, exactly. But death is. But we're primarily talking about death tonight. I just wanted to sort of touch on that briefly, um, because I do think that that's an important distinction. But death does have a significant role in most RPGs, in my opinion,
yes.
and the threat of death. Um, I People who have watched, people who have seen me either played in my games or watched me run games. No, I'm actually very fond of trying to make the players feel like they're threatened, but I rarely actually am trying to kill them because it doesn't there are times when it's the right thing to do. I mean, obviously I'm trying to defeat them in
Yeah.
combat, but like like in Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, if I knock a character out, I could just have the monsters just coup de grace them and kill them. But
Right.
that's doesn't it that seems kind of it's sort of dirty pool in some ways, despite the fact that
Yeah,
logically
it should
they
be.
should.
like I said, a player character death should ideally be heroic, unless you're playing a particularly gritty version of like Cyberpunk or I don't know, Blake 7 to RPG if that exists.
I mean, and I guess in a bunch of like westerns too, that would make sense too.
Yeah,
I mean, the more sort of dark and gritty the game, the more common I imagine the more common the player character death is, to a degree.
right.
So I mean, yeah, I agree with you, Eric. And this is one of my big thing is that the death of a player character should serve as a general rule of thumb. There's not a panacea. It's not does not apply to every game, but for most games, it should serve a purpose. Be it within the story, to advance for the plot line, further plot line.
It should not be used as a punishment.
That is definitively true. Um,
I just want to put that out there. Killing a player because they've been a dick is never cool.
yep.
I mean, unless it was all role playing and that character was a dick and the other character's legitimate response role playing is to kill him. In which case, your party has some problems. But
Yeah, or you're playing a game where most of the people are in some ways bordering on sociopaths.
right, you're playing the evil game. I've done this. It's actually lots of fun. It's kind of like playing Paranoia.
Well, paranoia is an obvious sort of.
Yeah. Paranoia is the exception to everything we've just said.
Pretty much. I mean, yes, actually, the computer should be trying to kill the player characters as punishment because that's the computer's job.
Besides, you've got more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You've got 6 clones. What the hell? Or is it 5 clones? I forget.
I think it's 6.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, that's the thing. It depending on the game, death means different things too. As an example, back to this sort of my example of superhero games, the death of a superhero. I mean, look at the comic books. I mean, ignoring the fact that in a lot of comic books, when when a character dies, they're back in a few months because comic book publishers are very loath to kill off popular characters because they don't want to lose that revenue stream. But usually when the death happens, it's an event. It's important. And they sort of like even the not particularly well handled and not well written death of Superman. That was a big event. Like not ignoring sort of a big marketing event. Like in the universe of the DC universe, Superman being killed, being killed, and sort of by Doomsday, and the way he died was a huge event, and it had ramifications for a while. Until
And
they
then
sort of
they undid it all.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, Rebirth of Superman. Thank you for breaking comic books.
it's not the first time.
I know.
Looking at you, Dark.
It is the most famous.
I don't know. For me, the sort of the prime example in comic books of a significant death being undone and sort of harming sort of a lot of things is Jean Grey.
Yeah, okay.
I have nothing but contempt for that character these days. I never was a big fan of hers to begin with, but God, I can't stand Jean Grey.
But I'm with Scott now. But Logan, you're so hot. But I'm with Scott. But I'm
Dead.
totally cheating on him with
Dead.
Logan.
She's dead.
And now
She
I'm
shouldn't have
dead.
come back.
Yeah.
How many times? Oh my God. But yeah, as an example, so in a good superhero RPG, if a player character dies, it should be significant. It should have ramifications, and you shouldn't bring them back through cheap artifice. And this is important. If a death of a character is going to happen, it's actually a death, not like a defeat or what have you. You have to work with the player on this one in that sort of a game.
Mm.
Because otherwise you won't be able to have the same sort of impact. And like so you have to talk through. It's one of the things you have to, as I always say, communicate with your players, etc. But this is one of those crucial things that in games like a superhero game or games where the characters are big damn heroes and are important, their death should be, you should work through with the player characters about it, because if it looks like it might happen. Um,
Here's the thing. If someone is going to die for a stupid reason, just dumb dice in a not fun way, that's what fudging is for. That's why the GM never rolls his dice in front of the players.
well, I actually do. I started doing that a while
Yes,
ago.
but no one actually looks at your dice.
True, but I often do because
Which makes it even better for you to fudge.
I just sort of have this I just have this sort of I have this thing about I like actually the players knowing being able to see what I'm rolling just because it makes the game more fair.
Yeah.
And as a general rule of thumb, I try not to fudge during when I'm DMing. Um, but in the case of a random death, I will basically say, okay, that was dumb. You're out of the fight. And again, this is in a normal campaign. There are campaigns where it's like, yeah, whatever, but we'll work through this. But especially, and again, I'll get back to sort of handling. But Dungeons and Dragons is a little bit different since most Dungeons and Dragons games, the player characters can be resurrected. It's sort of
Yeah.
an in-game. There's an in-game mechanical way to do it.
And let's face facts. Thanks to Jean Grey and Superman, if a superhero, if you die in a superhero RPG, you can come back. That doesn't mean you won't come back as a Black Lantern, but you'll come back.
Yeah.
Thank you, DC, for fixing your problem with the revolving death door, and then undoing it all with the new 52.
Oh, God. Yeah, there's a reason I don't read mainstream comics much anymore. Um, but yeah, I, I'm sort of struggling with this because it's one of those things that as a DM, it's a little bit hard for me to it's as a game master, there's a line you have to walk on player character death.
It's true. And
Because
it's really tough to do.
yeah, that's actually one of the things that's hardest as a game master is handling that. And
And the rules are different with each group.
that's definitively true. There are groups where player character death, they'll take it and roll with it, and they'll make a new character or what have you. And there are groups where it really can be a problem.
That there are players that it will vary between players in the same group also.
That's definitively true. As we've mentioned before, every player is different. They've got different wants and needs, and death is one of those things that they'll have their own opinions on.
Right. And let's face facts. I'm relatively good with if my character dies, as long as in some act of doom terrorism, because I am a sucker for doom terrorism.
Right.
If I die holding the bridge, even if the holding the bridge ultimately proved futile, I am cool with that.
Oh, the last man holding the bridge death is quite possibly one of the most powerful and awesome deaths in fiction.
Damn straight.
It's sort of technically a cliche and almost a trope, but it's still too powerful for me to call it one of those things.
It's too awesome to be a cliche.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, cliches are sort of in many ways they're sort of the nuts and bolts
Something
of language.
that is cheapened by overuse.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, the last man holding the bridge isn't overdone somehow, because it doesn't come up that often, surprisingly. But as a great example of it, though it didn't actually happen within the actual timeline of the show. But in Babylon 5, in the first season, there's a sort of a flash forward to the Babylon 5 being destroyed, and there's a scene with Garibaldi, basically doing the holding the bridge thing, and he said, "This is what I was born for." As everybody's fleeing, he's sitting there, gunning down whatever it is that's attacking, and he's going to die, and then the station explodes, but people got off the station. And
the Dargo's death at the end of Farscape is exactly. He was literally the last guy on the bridge.
Yep.
And I'll admit it. I teared up. My favorite character died the most awesome death possible for a character to die.
Yeah, it's I that's so yeah,
Screaming,
that is
"Who's your daddy?" Actually, screaming, "I'm your daddy." But
but yeah, that's going out like that is I think sort of almost in many ways the ideal death for a character.
absolutely, if your
Um,
character's going to die, that's the way you want that character to go.
and honestly, if in a combat something like that, if I had a character who's dying, like in Dungeons and Dragons games, it's like, oh, your character's going to die. I'd actually consider giving them and it looks like the party is in deep trouble. I would seriously consider giving the character a sort of a second wind of some sort and saying, okay, look, are you cool with the concept that your character's going to die, but you'll get the last moment of being able to hold off the guy so the rest of the party can escape?
Are you
And
kidding? I'd jump on that.
I know you would. Now, not every player would, but that's an offer I would consider making. And believe me, there have been times I've thought about that as a player character, like thinking, wow, things are looking grim. My character in the situation would basically say, okay, you guys go, I'll hold them off. In fact, I've actually said that in character more than once.
Hmm,
I think I did it in one of the games with you guys. I forget which one though.
you may have. I think Nalem said it of all people. But
Yeah, it was one of those. Yeah, Nalem said it. I think Nalem did say it of all people.
yeah,
Which is
Nalem of all people said it. And then Kenny said, "Fuck that! You're not dying a heroic death. I'm dying a heroic death." And we all stuck around one.
yeah. Oh, that's right. I do. I remember. I actually it did. It was Nalem.
Yeah.
We came both the way around it. I forget what it was, but it was a. I remember you looking at me like, "What the hell?" But it was completely in character as the thing.
Yeah, because Nalem might be a backstabbing, sneaky git, but his first and foremost loyalty was to his crew.
Yeah. Even above himself, which is it's one of those little subtleties that Nalem that I think both I know that Will did not get about Nalem.
Yeah.
I don't know if Leland did.
Um,
I
I
don't think.
I think Chris totally got it too.
Oh, Chris got it. I know Chris got it, and you got it, and I think Hannah got it.
Yeah. However, I don't think Lorf would do it.
No, Glorf wouldn't. Oh no, dear Lord, no.
Glorf, Glorf, for all his charm, is a bad man.
Rio Planeswalker in the chat actually has that brings up a wonderful thing, but a quote from Linkara actually, which is it's not a direct quote, it's sort of paraphrasing it, but I think I'm going to read off. Linkara said something to this effect, and he was completely spot on when he said it. If you're going to kill a character, here's a tip: make sure it is their crowning moment of awesome. The instant where everyone looks at the character and says, "Oh, that is the most badass thing I have ever seen."
Damn straight.
And
Yes.
and that's specifically he's talking about comic books at that point, and
But it applies to RPGs.
it applies to a lot of RPGs. For me,
Again, it doesn't apply to Paranoia, which is an exception to everything we're saying tonight.
yes, it doesn't apply to Paranoia. It doesn't have to apply to Call of Cthulhu.
Actually, yeah, Call of Cthulhu doesn't have to apply to it. I'd say
there are times where it does.
Heresy, though.
There are times when it does. Like, someone basically, dying to hold off something so you guys can stop the ritual to stop the old one from being summoned.
Right. I don't think it really applies to cult, because cult's all about being icky.
Yeah. I think, honestly, in some ways, I think it almost has to apply to Vampire. Like, I think in many ways,
Yeah.
as sort of the last moment where, a PC is sort of regaining a sense of their humanity as they die, it would be a fantastic way to go out in a Vampire
I would say it definitely has to apply to Vampire, and absolutely applies to Werewolf.
Oh, God, yeah.
Werewolf is like the definition of friggin' doomed heroism.
Mage 2.
Part of the reason why I used to play it.
Mage 2 to a degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things. So, but interestingly enough, it's weirdly it both applies and doesn't apply in Feng Shui. Actually, it applies in Feng Shui, but Feng Shui is a bit weird. Because of where it's drawing from, the sort of source it's drawing from. feng shui games, while it doesn't happen often, and I haven't killed many player characters, it's one of the games where I've had the most players die.
Mm.
In fact, I did have one where virtually everybody died at the end in the last session.
It seems to be how most of my games end up. Everyone ends up dying in the end. When I'm running a game. Which is why I don't think Chris would enjoy it if I were running a game.
Yeah. As I said, I don't try to kill player characters, but
Neither do I, it just happens.
I know.
I'm cool with pulling punches, but after a while, I just stop.
But, honestly, if we kept going with the Mech Warrior game I was running, and if we ever get back to it, I would not be surprised if you guys actually did go out all at the all of you going out at the end, holding off the clans.
Oh hell, I'd be down with that. Are you kidding?
Mm-hmm.
I think my character's greatest regret would be losing the Atlas. Doesn't matter if he dies. Losing the family Atlas would be the problem.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, that's the thing is, so I think from here we can sort of start talking about sort of games where, and how to handle games that where I mean, we've sort of been talking about to a degree, but sort of a bit more sort of definedly, sort of handling games where player character death is more common. We'll start with that one, I think. So there are games like Paranoia where it's gonna happen a lot.
It's built into the game, and Paranoia is very much a beer and pretzels RPG. To use an old wargaming
It can be. I mean, I know people who sort of do it a bit more seriously.
Those people never have enough fun playing it, though. I've played it with people trying to do Paranoia seriously, and it always devolved into hurt feelings. Well, I was the only one laughing the whole time because it was hilarious.
Well, I think with the right group you can do it seriously without it devolving to hurt feelings.
Right.
But you sort of have to approach it the way you have to approach playing Diplomacy. Which is another game that I, in general, don't recommend playing with friends because it often will lead to hurt feelings because you're going to stab each other in the back because that's the point of Diplomacy.
This is why I don't play multiplayer games of Warhammer with my Skaven. Someone's getting shivved in the back. Although I could see teaming up with Chris's Dark Elves for a game. And as soon as we knew that we had it in the bag, immediately turning on each other and losing because of that. Because it would be funny.
Yeah, I could totally see you guys doing that. But so Eric, other than the obvious, oh my God, so yeah, Ben Hurt says there are combinations of DMs and players that focus on trying to kill the players. Not fun for me, but it's good for the right crowds. The game itself may not matter as much as people in the game. Yeah, I can see that, Ben. True. As an aside, that I believe is my my brother Ben.
Oh.
Hey Ben.
Hi, Peter's brother.
Glad you could join us tonight.
Indeed, it is.
So yeah, there are definitely games where that's definitely true, and Paranoia sort of is one of them.
Yeah, I maintain that you cannot play Paranoia with certain people, and you cannot play it seriously. It is intended to get the game, as far as I'm concerned, is intended to get the silliest death,
or the most awesome death,
or the most awesome death,
or the most awesome kill, or the best complete utter betrayal that leads to someone else's death.
I still have to hand it to Mike Penault for the most awesome kill, betrayal, and death all in the same instant.
Sweet. Okay, you got to recount this one, man.
Okay, so it was the one time I played Paranoia with this particular group. Most of whom were cool with it and thought it was an awesome idea. A couple of it do not have the mindset for it. So everyone knows commie mutant traders are the enemy in Paranoia. You are a commie mutant trader. Everyone is. The end.
Right.
So Mike's mutant power was sort of a techno empathy, kinesis, telepathy kind of deal.
Right.
You can manipulate technology. So he ends up rigging in basically an alliance with me to off our friend Aaron. And his cunning plan, I plant the physical evidence, and his cunning plan was to set up uh, the security cameras with a feed showing Aaron's character going, "Mwahaha! I am evil, and I will destroy the computer." Pretty much verbatim.
Right.
What he didn't tell me was it also involved me being the same screen laughing at with him.
Aha.
So of course we are destroyed. At which point Mike is foolish enough, because it's Paranoia is that kind of game, to say, "Aha, I can't believe that worked as well as it did." At which point he also got vaporized.
Oops.
It was a glorious kill death betrayal.
Sweet. I can't believe that worked that well. Oh, really? Crap, the computer's listening. Ah. So yeah, Kaz, Krempy in the chat, our friend Kaz, says Call of Cthulhu is another one. Yeah, as we I mentioned a little bit earlier, Call of Cthulhu is another one of those games where usually by the end of the story, uh, the characters are most if not all the player characters are either going to end up dead, horribly maimed, or completely insane. Sometimes a combination of those three.
Sometimes all three.
Yeah, when insane, we're horribly maimed and then die.
Or
Or when
end up an
insane, we're killed and then horribly maimed.
Named ghost.
But it's again, I think that every game of Call of Cthulhu should involve something akin to the Last Man on the Bridge.
Yeah.
That's my personal take.
And everyone's going to end up fucked up at the end of Call of Cthulhu. That's just the way the game works. And sometimes you'll be killed by what in most games would be considered kind of a stupid thing. In Call of Cthulhu, everything that seems a goblin equivalent in Call of Cthulhu is actually a terrifyingly monstrous, dangerous thing. And yes, being killed offhandedly by a goblin in Call of Cthulhu still makes you badass.
Yeah. Yes, but if you last any period of time with anything that's actually not human.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are plenty of games. As we said, there are games where that sort of thing is the norm, and there are games where it's not the norm. Also, I mean, as I said, we touched on a lot of superhero games where death really shouldn't be the norm for most superhero games.
Absolutely not.
I personally feel
you're a superhero.
Yeah, I feel that most Dungeons and Dragons type games that really shouldn't be the norm either. Again, the player
depends on the type of of Dungeons and Dragons. If you're playing the evil team, then death should just come often and not at the hands of your friends.
I don't know about that, but again, I think that my problem is that for games where it's not really part of the ethos of the game, like Paranoia or Call of Cthulhu or what have you, I think that lots of player character death sort of cheapens it and makes it.
Yeah. It's intended to be cheap in Paranoia.
Yeah, exactly. But like even in an evil game, if player characters are constantly stabbing each other in the back and kill each other off all the time,
then nothing actually happens. Which
right.
is why these games are only fun for a session or two.
Well, at least
in my opinion.
I think you could actually pull off a good evil game that, and I don't know how to do this because I'm not good at this sort of thing, where it's that wouldn't be the norm. It would be the betrayal and big thing would be an event.
I could see. I haven't played in one like this, but I could totally see someone doing a superhero game, but everyone's playing supervillains. You're doing sort of a Legion of Doom type of deal.
Yeah, sure.
And that would work really well.
But I mean, again,
and yes, Cursor, sudden and inevitable betrayal, but it will be an event.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even like sort of from the stories I've heard about the Underdark game that Chris ran for
right.
third edition. I think it was third edition.
I
don't know what.
Could not tell you. I was not involved.
Yeah, I know. But we've heard them talk about it. It didn't sound like a lot of player characters died in that. I mean, they were scheming against each other, but they never actually killed each other.
Okay, fair enough. The scheming should come often at the hands of players in an evil game.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, even not all evil characters will be schemers either. Is a thing. I mean,
this is true. Honestly, come to think of it, the Farscape game I played in years ago could be considered an evil game.
Yeah.
I don't want to call our GURP sci-fi game evil. I think my character might be the only evil one, and the Doctor. But
Yeah, well, to a degree, Will's character is sort of evil.
oh yeah, Will's character who never shows up. Will, if you're listening, show up to game once in a while.
And my character Bob is
Oh, Bob's not evil. Bob's nowhere near. Bob's not an evil
he's a
character.
crook, but he's not evil.
Yeah.
There's a different there. That's the thing is that like traditionally with like Dungeons and Dragons alignments, we talked about this, but
Yeah.
Bob would be evil because he is a thief, and he steals for personal gain, and he will do that. But Bob isn't really evil per se. He's not even really amoral, but
Yeah.
he's a
just got
complicated.
different. He is more. He's differently moraled.
To a degree. I mean, it's D&D. That's my thing with the D&D alignments is
They can be
characters-
very limiting.
they're. It's not that they're limiting per se. It's that they're limited.
Yes.
As I've said before, I think of them more as guidelines more than anything else. I don't know how I describe Bob's alignment.
think I think I'd probably put Bob in the chaotic neutral area.
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, but yeah,
Because he's not a bad guy. He's not out to screw people unless they deserve it or unless he has a sudden need for it. But he also has no respect for laws or rules.
nope, none.
And he's not altruistic in the least bit.
There are things he will. There are things he does that he will not stand for, and that he does have, that there are things he will do altruistically. I mean, if he can get paid while doing it too, great. But for example, last session is a great example of that. The way I handled, what happened in the previous session is both Eric and mine were involved in a poker game with a noble of this race who are slavers and are generally horrible, evil bastards. And Bob cleaned up because he's really good at this sort of thing.
The social engine is really good at playing poker. Go figure.
Yeah, the con artist and skilled gambler is really good at poker. Shocking. Yeah, Eric's character is also very good at poker, but it's sort of Eric's.
I was outclassed
Yeah.
because my character is a space pirate. And he's got all the skills that makes him good at gambling because he's a dashing Errol Flynn type of deal. He also can fight his way out of a wet paper bag. So I didn't invest as heavily as Peter did.
Right. So, and I ended up taking this noble for basically everything he had that he brought with him, which included his ship, his yacht, and the crew were apparently slaves. Which is one of those things that does not sit well with Bob, who's a big believer in personal freedom. So yeah, needless to say, I
still say we should have kept Starscream.
Hell no. I'm not keeping someone who is a congenital backstabber and slave overseer on my ship. No, gone. So yeah, that's the thing is that
take him on my ship.
What?
We need more cannon fodder.
But he wouldn't have been good cannon fodder, Eric, is my point.
It's not his job to be good at shooting. It's his job to get shot.
He wouldn't be good at that, is my point.
I can throw him ahead of us. I'm
no, you
pretty
can't.
sure
He's bigger than you are. He's a Ka. He's a 15-foot long snake man.
I can throw him like a bola.
At any rate. So what happened was I basically, okay, well, you guys, if you want to work for me, I will happily pay you. If you don't, I will try to get you to where you want to go. And this is one of those rare moments where Bob is actually being somewhat altruistic.
This is true. You're being pretty altruistic there.
Because, as I said, Bob's biggest belief, his one actual moral standing, is personal freedom. And and they were enslaved, and Bob's like, no, that can't stand. And it's the thing is, Bob actually likes people. He also likes taking their money, but But he also believes that if you are if you choose to be a sucker, then he deserves to take your money. And he's again, Bob is another one of those characters I've sort of based loosely on ethos from various shows I've watched. My favorite, he's basically a lot of his sort of personality ethos is drawn from various characters from the BBC TV series Hustle. Bob would fit in very well there, actually.
Yeah, he
But
would.
he's not any one particular character from that show. He's not the sort of level planner that Mickey Bricks is. Um, he's not at all like Danny.
I just realized we're completely off topic.
We are, but
I'm sorry.
well, we the thing is, we sort of mind out talking about death, I think, to a degree. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the point, though, is that we got to this because we were talking about how like neither of our characters in the game would really be the guy who would be the last man standing on the bridge.
Because here's the thing. Glorf's big one and only moral standing is you stick by your crew.
Right.
Because they're your crew. They've got your back, you've got theirs. Until there comes a point, as is true with all piracy, where it's just you got to cut your losses. That hasn't come up yet.
Right. Yeah, and
it's very much the code from Pirates of the Caribbean. You stick with your crew, but them that get left behind, them that fall behind get left behind.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Bob's a little bit different in that he will do his best to help people out, but he'll be the first to, if he thinks if it's necessary, he'll cut and run. And anyone who wants to come with him, he'll be happy to try to make sure they get that he can help them along. But
we're playing jerks. Well, you're not really. You're playing a weasel. I'm playing a jerk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bob's definitely a weasel. Bob's a likable weasel, but he's a weasel.
I need to not play a jerk in the next game.
So yeah, but back to the Ben Hurt in the chat here says it seems like player death is largely tied to the tone of the game. Back to the actual topic here, in theory. Jack Burton wasn't the type of character to die, for example, but the killer totally had to die at the end. Absolutely.
Yes.
And we sort of touched on that to a degree, but that really sort of encapsulates. Definitely, it ties into the tone of the campaign. Like as I said, the Feng Shui games, it's tied into sort of the Hong Kong cinema ethos, and a lot of the characters have dark pasts, and their best moment for absolute sort of redemption will probably come at the end of their lives when they finally take a stand.
Spike Spiegel immediately leaps to mind.
Spike Spiegel is exactly.
He was doomed from the first episode, but
yeah,
it was a good death.
Yeah. So that's the thing. But anyways, sort of, I want to touch one last thing on sort of to sum things up a bit. How you actually handle a character's death in the game. As I said, we talked about like how they should die and such, but what happens after? That's
Most
actually something
good games I've been in. There's usually a couple sessions while shit gets shaked out before we even discuss whether the player wants to come back.
Right.
And then usually it's assumed they're going to roll up another character and continue playing with their friends. But there's usually a session or two where there's fallout, and yeah.
So yeah,
there might even be a funeral.
That's kind of awesome. I've not actually, as I said, I've had very few actual permanent deaths in the middle of a game. Mostly because most of the games I've run, there are three types of games I've run most often, which are D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, for obvious reasons, and for most D&D games, resurrection is sort of built into the game universe. So if a player character dies, assuming that it's not really early on in the campaign, in which case there isn't a lot of bonds formed between the characters, so okay, whatever, we'll make a new character. Oh my god, I just realized that Marty's in the chat too. Hey, Marty, friend of ours who moved to Arizona.
Oh hell! Hey Marty, what's up, man?
Good to see you. Wow, we're getting a lot of people we've known over the years showing up. That's awesome. But at any rate, back to what I was saying. So early on in like a D&D game, if death before you can really afford resurrection, you know, it's you haven't really had time to form the attachments between the characters. The bonds aren't really that strong, so it's not a big deal when that happens. You can move
Hmm.
on, make a new character, etc. Late in the game, you can afford resurrection at that point, unless it's supposed to be sort of the dramatic big death where and that's when the fallout will have to come in. But I've not had that happen. Um, or superhero games where again death is not really a big part of it for the player characters. I mean, they should feel occasionally put in death traps, what have you, but I tend to run more sort of Silver Agey slash post Iron Agey games. So
I'm sorry, Mr. Logan, but Nick Fury's he's passed on. He's dead. Well, when he's done being dead, tell him Logan's looking for him.
one of my favorite exchanges that explains everything about comic books. It's longer than that, but it's great. At any rate, or feng shui, where death is probably going to happen at some point, but it's usually not going to happen in the middle of the game. I've had one player character die in the middle of a session due to the dice hating him, and I came up with a good workaround for that, which I'll get to in a second. But I've had one or two other games of feng shui where the campaign ended with everybody dying.
That's a good end of the campaign.
Yeah,
For
and
Feng
sometimes
Shui, that's a good end.
yeah, and in one of them it was a little anticlimactic
Mm.
because it was not quite to the level of the it was sort of on the level with the ending of the sequel to the Chinese Connection that Jackie Chan was in, where they emerged from the mines having defeated the evil mine guys, etc., and then the Japanese army showed up and gunned them all down.
Right.
It wasn't quite that anticlimactic and out of nowhere, but it was sort of the player characters had showed up to save they showed up to save his folk. They were saving basically Wong Fei Hong was in deep shit. Big sort of named character from Hong Kong cinema, and they saved his ass because he was dying and such. They got him out of there, but they were basically all gunned down and killed doing that. One character
Mm.
made it out and got Wong out alive, and that was basically the end of the campaign. I wasn't really planning on it going quite that badly, but it it did,
It
and that's
did.
it was one of that's the thing with feng shui is things can spiral to that without you meaning to, because the game is set up to occasionally bad shit will happen. Um, weird. It's a mechanical thing. I don't want to go into that too much. But those are the three games I've run most often. The only other game I can think of where the player character ended up effectively dead in the middle of it was actually at the hands of the players, um, and that's an entirely different kettle of fish. Also, the guy whose character was killed was pretty much planning on leaving the game anyways. So because
Right.
basically he wasn't living close by anymore, so he really couldn't play
Mm.
as often. So
Um. Yeah, I think the best player death I've ever seen. I've talked about it before. The medical laser in the old Farscape game.
right,
Again, came at the hands of a player in the middle of a game. Literally in the middle of a session, in fact.
right, and I believe as you said there was a lot of fallout from that.
There was a lot of fallout from that, and it was pretty brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, so I think to sum up, sort of how you handle death during player character death in the middle of a game, because that's where it's most important. If it happens at the end of the game or at the beginning of the game, it's easier to handle and it doesn't require as much thought and sort of deft touch. But in the middle, my biggest piece of advice is make sure you're talking with your players and sort of getting a feel for what their feelings on this is. Um, but give the players the time, especially if give the players the time to let the fallout happen organically is basically what I'm trying to say, because that's one of the things that you can't really script, and the players have to be able to work through it.
Kind of like life in that. Although I am not going to say anything about an RPG being anything remotely like life. It's such a heavy subject.
Right, exactly. But that's the thing. Like as I said, if a death in especially if in a game, as I said, where the characters are big damn heroes and are important, you have to let the death sort of the player what have how the death how the death affects the players. That has to be handled organically, and then you as a DM have to think about how that will affect the NPCs around that.
Mm.
And I think that pretty much covers the topic. I think.
Yeah,
Anything else?
I think so.
So
I mean, I'm sure there's more we can go with this,
oh yeah, there's plenty of there's plenty more.
but then we start getting into kind of we start getting into craziness. We start getting into the more philosophical and frankly maudlin things that I don't think we're prepared to handle on this.
Right. So, but yeah, I think that covers the basics of the topic. Uh, I will actually get to that, Dan, when we in just a moment. But I think that covers most of the topic for tonight. Though there's going to be a question that we're going to answer. So we're going to move on to the Q&A section of the show, and we'll start with Dan's question there. He's asking if I've ever run a game where I killed the party but had it be an illusion/dream. Yes, actually, sort of. Uh, the best example of that was from the GURP Sci-Fi game I ran back that started in the summer after I graduated from high school and continued on during vacations while I was in college with a bunch of my friends from high school. Peter Shaw, Joey, my brother, and our friend Matt, and Joey's brother Luke. And there was a point during the game where I decided to sort of the campaign had been going on for a while at this point, and I thought that giving them sort of a sort of I had sort of a vision of where I thought things would sort of end up, and I thought I decided to sort of give people glimpses and sort of I decided to do a little bit of storytelling. So and the party had just run into a very they just basically met a precursor basically.
Oh
So
dear.
yeah, it was actually a cool session. But so they all during the night basically they all had dreams, and in virtually all of them they died, and it was sort of basically dreams of their. This was a game where the players, almost all the characters, this was bordering on an evil game to a large degree. They were basically not very nice people for the most part, who ended up sort of basically ended up sort of saving the galaxy. Weirdly, it was kind of a cool game. At any rate, players who are largely motivated by personal gain ending up saving a large chunk of the galaxy from bad stuff. I actually really enjoyed that game. But so yeah, basically they all had sort of moments, sort of dreams of their characters sort of reaching, sort of in many places, sort of reaching their pinnacle of sort of they're massively all of them become massively important, but they were all in horrible, awful situations. Ended up being in awful situations, which led to their deaths. Um, one of them, sort of, was, sort of in charge of, one of them sort of, was dreaming, sort of saw images of himself as, basically, an important, like a monarch almost, ruling over some place, and, realizing that, he was in the middle of a war, and then, his planet was being orbitally bombarded, and then, seeing the ships in orbit above his palace, and then, basically explosion, and him dead. And then one of the other player characters, was in charge of a fleet and, was engaged in space battles. And then, the next thing is he, seeing himself give the order to start the orbital bombardment of a planet. And then the next scene is, him sort of being tried for crimes against sentience and then being executed. Um, and so on. And I did that with all the player characters to a certain degree. There was different levels of stuff. I don't remember all of them in particular, all the particular details. Those are the two I remember best. And as Dan points out, it sounds a bit like Babylon 5. Yes, that game was heavily influenced by Babylon 5 and Blake 7.
No, really.
Two of my favorite sci-fi series, not surprisingly. But yeah, I've done that. That's what I've done. So Eric, have you ever been in a sort of situation where that's been done?
Um, Not that I can remember off the top of my head. Usually player character death, you can see it coming a mile away, and it's with the exception of the medical laser.
Yeah, no one saw that.
And it's usually like, this is gonna be awesome. Oh, I can say it in my line. This is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be so cool. And I can't think of any time where everyone's been killed in a dream, um, or
Yeah,
an illusion.
yeah. That as I said, I usually do it. I almost never do it as a way to sort of like just killing them off and then say it was a dream. I usually try to do it in sort of a way that sort of is part of the story and is storytelling. Well, the one or two times I've done it, but yeah, it was all a dream is sort of a cheap trope, and I try to avoid it unless it actually is unless it serves a purpose for the story beyond
Mm.
ha ha ha, look, nothing bad happened. Um, but yeah, I think that sort of covers that. Uh, yeah, Marty actually sort of mentioned what this is sort of tying back into the question of the show. But what about a delayed death for heroic sacrifice slash dying monologue? Absolutely, those
Hell
are.
yeah.
That's actually factored into the rules in feng shui. If you are at the point where you are dead, it is expected that they get a last moment to at least sort of have their last words before they pass on, or do something suitably you know Hong Kong action movie-ish. Be it like take a last shot at the bad guys, or have you even if it fails. I'm sort of if a non-Hong
Or
Kong
pulling
movie that,
all the grenades you have on your belt.
or a non-Hong Kong movie example would be God, I can't remember the character's name, but the he was a naval officer. It was I can't remember. Is that in uh, Pirates of the Caribbean: World's End? It's the
Mm.
guy who was in the first movie was in love with Kate Winslet's character, and he basically covers their retreat off the off Davy Jones' ship, which I'm forgetting the name of all of a sudden. I'm terrible at names right now.
Flying Dutchman.
The Flying Dutchman. Basically he's covering their, basically helping them get her and the crew of the Chinese crew, the Asian crew off the ship. He gets run through by Will's dad, and he's sitting there dying. And
I think they actually are Chinese.
I
I
think they
think
are
they're on a
Chinese.
junk.
I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. And then he's sitting there dying, and Davy Jones walks up and does his are you afraid of death? And he as he's dying, he just reaches up and stabs Davy Jones in the chest. I
Right.
thought
Right.
that sort of thing almost every character deserves in some way, shape, or form. No, stabbing Davy Jones doesn't do jack or squat.
Right. But it's that last act of defiance that makes it
And it
work.
was a great moment, and it's one of the best moments
Yes.
in the entire movie. Which wasn't
The
a
movie was kind of mediocre,
yeah, I
honestly.
agree, but that was a great scene. Great scene. So yeah, that's absolutely something I think is actually a good thing to do, and it doesn't work in every genre, but in a lot of games, I think it's awesome.
It it doesn't work in Paranoia. And it's the only one I can think of where I as a rule wouldn't allow it. I'd
Yeah,
allow it in pretty much everything
I
else,
would too, but I'm sure there are other games.
unless they're swallowed whole by some horrible otherworldly monstrosity, um,
Call
which
of
has
Cthulhu.
happened.
Yeah. Someone. Let's see. There's a couple other questions in the chat here. Have I ever killed off a PC to prove to others that they are flesh and blood while they think they're invincible? No, I've never done this. That was Zastiver in the chat. Uh, I I don't believe in cheap PC death in general.
It's yeah. If the players think they're invulnerable, they're kind of ruining the fun of the game for themselves.
As I
the
said,
the risk is part of the risk of death or failure or whatever is part of what makes the game fun.
yeah. I've never done that. I don't think it just I again I don't like death to be cheap is basically what it is.
Oh, I've come back as a pawn of darkness, Marty. That was actually kind of awesome. I
Uh,
was possessed by a Nurgle demon.
yeah. But yeah, that's sort of that's sort of my take on it. There was one other question I saw in here that I wanted to answer, although I think we touched on it briefly. Um, do, 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 do. Oh, have I ever? Zero Awakening asks, have I ever used death as a way to teach players a lesson? This sort of ties in that same question. Again, no. Well, asterisk. I've never used player character death to try to teach players a lesson, and I wouldn't do I I really hesitate to do it with an NPC, but I have done it. I have killed off an NPC to do that, I think, once. And that was I mean, again, almost everything I'm saying right now is not entirely true. Almost certainly did it at some point when I was younger and a much more inexperienced DM and had sort of different opinions on how games ran. But I don't remember details from back then because, that was, like, say I was like roughly like 12 or somewhere like around 15.
Yeah.
Um, that was well over 20 years ago. So I don't remember
Um,
have I killed NPCs off around the characters to as either part of the story or as motivation or as a way to sort of bring a dramatic point home? Damn straight I have. But again, I rarely want death to just be random and cheap. I want it to be I like to have, death of someone who has a name and is of some import. Like death of nameless mooks, sure, whatever that happens in the right game, that's fine, and you won't notice it. But like someone who's actually who's a character, an actual character, shouldn't be cheap. It should matter. Um,
I have killed player characters to point make a point of showing that they're not invulnerable. They get good proper deaths, but
sure.
yeah, I've done it to prove that they're not invulnerable. The only example I can think of is many thousands of years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth and fought against their mammalian oppressors. Um, someone caught me fudging dice rolls to keep people from ending up with cheap deaths, and the players called me out on it. I was like, "You want me to stop this?" And they're like, "Yeah." You really think it you really want me to? Yeah, it cheapens the play experience. Okay, and very next session I killed two of them. And yeah, they kind of made the point. I actually ended up retconning those deaths, but
Yeah, I think that yeah. As I said, I've never done it. I think in the right there are times when I think it might actually be appropriate, but I've never had it come up where I thought it was. So again, none of what either of us are saying are pure gospel truth. This is what my impressions and my
what I'm saying
experiences.
is definitely gospel truth. I am in fact quoting insert holy text here. Um,
Aha. My point is, though, it's based on my experience as a DM with the various groups I've run and the people I tend to game with. What we're talking about, there is no universal answer to what will actually work. And for some groups, uh, more random deaths are fine, and that's fine. And in certain games, that's always, as we said, it makes sense. I do want to cover the one email question we got, although it's going to be a little bit tricky to answer, but I want to make sure to touch it before we wrap up for tonight. Um, let me get the email up here. This is from Inelson, who emailed us last week.
mm,
He asked, Dear Peter and Eric, I wish to include firearms in my campaign, specifically muskets. How can I keep them balanced and have the players use them while still playing their classes? I'm guessing this is
what
guns and
game
D&D
are
specifically.
okay? Um, third edition actually has several different rules for various settings for firearms. I found actually the firearms in Kingdoms to be good because honestly, the firearms in Iron Kingdoms for straight up DPS just aren't as good as a bow and arrow. But they're the only gun with an 18 to 20 crit rate that was times 4. A good shot would just kill you. And translating, I don't know how you translate that to 4th edition, but
Yeah, but yeah, it would depend on the edition of the game.
yeah.
If you are,
We'll assume 4th. Peter, you know 4th better than I do.
I'm going to get to fourth in a second. Specifically, if you're talking about third edition, or Eric's right, find a copy, see if you can track down the rules for firearms from Iron Kingdoms. They did it pretty well.
Actually,
I believe
Privateer
Pathfinder
just released their new Iron Kingdoms system. It is not compatible with D20 as far as I know.
It's not.
Let me look it
It's an
up.
entirely different system. It's an entirely different system.
Yeah,
But I was gonna say, Pathfinder does have rules for firearms, and I would not surprise me if they're good because Pathfinder does a fairly good job with most things in general. It's not my personal preferred system, and I personally wouldn't want to run it myself because I'm not a big fan of the 3.5 base rules as a game master.
And if you
But
can dig up an old copy of the Iron Kingdom's player's book, it should translate easily into Pathfinder.
yep. All right. So how would you want to, if you want to include firearms in a fourth ed game? This is a different kettle of fish. My
Yeah.
personal take on this, and this is, it depends on whether you want to include other weapons. The big thing about fourth edition is it's a much more abstract game than even third edition or second edition D&D was.
Mm.
My personal gut feeling on this is, and it's a very cinematic game. So, there are two ways to handle it. Way one is basically take the rules take the crossbows outside of the hand crossbow and just scratch out the word crossbow and write in black powder gun. Like the regular crossbow is, the regular crossbow is a musket, and the superior crossbow would be a black powder rifle. And so they'd have to use an action to reload, a minor action to reload.
I would consider upping the damage on them, or giving them some other special cookie, because there is a pretty good reason why firearms are
again
end up being as prevalent as they are.
yes, but I'm not trying. But this is I'm talking about for its basic fourth edition game. We're not going for actual realism. We're going for cinematic flair.
Okay, fair enough.
We want to keep things simple. So my personal take on it would be the first option and the simplest option would be to refluff crossbows in general into firearms, and you could find a way to do it with the hand crossbow also.
You know
Option
what I'd
two.
probably do? This is entirely expanding on Peter's point. Is I would make them much harder to get, and I would add extra dice on a crit.
Sure. Yeah,
like a Vanguard weapon.
Yeah, something like that.
Vanguard's the one that do like an extra die 8 on a crit, right?
Yeah. Well, actually,
Yeah.
here's the other option. The other option would be to take this is sort of entirely spitballing it, and it's sort of based off what Eric's saying. It's sort of what I was thinking. Is you look at the crossbow stats, up them to because crossbows basically have a certain damage, they have certain ranges, and they require a minor action to reload. I would change them to you could up the damage to give them like +1 damage over and over, like so. A regular crossbow is D8 damage. You kick it up to D8 +1 damage. Change it to change basically for all. This is all of them. So you change it to on the regular crossbow and the superior crossbow. Change it to take their stats. Instead of being load minor, they'd be load move. So you'd have to use a move action to reload them. And then give them the high crit property, so that when you crit, you you get an extra, you max the base damage and then roll the base damage, then add the die roll of the base damage. And then for the hand crossbow, which is normally load free, but you have to have an open hand to reload it. It would become load minor and have to have an open hand to reload it. That's how I think I would, off the top of my head, for a 4th edition game specifically. This is because you want to in keeping it simple. That's probably how I would handle it. And I think off the top of my head that would be roughly balanced.
Yeah.
So again,
and if you're using another system like Pathfinder or 3.5, the rules are out there. You just need to find them.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing. So that's again, it's not realistic. It's not. That said, I think it will capture sort of the feel of those weapons cinematically without slowing the game down too much.
There isn't an armor-piercing option in 4th Ed, is there?
No, that's sort of represented by high crit, really.
Yeah, okay. Because I was thinking it's kind of the thing that firearms were really good at, is just ignoring your armor.
Yeah. I mean, again, like in the 2nd edition game, there are rules for it in 2nd edition D&D also. They actually had rules for damage weapons versus armor types. blah, blah,
The
blah.
the second edition, they actually had rules for an Equibus in second edition, and it was a magic item that required other magic items, and it was stupid and ridiculous and dumb, and nobody liked it or used it ever.
Right. Oh yeah. So, but you have to have make sure they have ammunition and such, and they buy ammunition. Um, and you'll probably have to fudge the fact that if they get hit by a fire spell, realistically, if they get hit by a big fire spell, their gunpowder might blow up.
If you use the Iron Kingdom's rules for a 3.5 or Pathfinder game, make it cheaper to run guns, because part of the flavor is guns are expensive to run in Iron Kingdoms because there's a war on, and the militaries are hogging all the powder.
Right.
So just make it a bit cheaper, honestly.
Yeah.
It's something I'd suggest.
Yeah, that's sort of my take on it. Again, this is when I'm talking about the fourth edition one, it's not realistic, so don't. But I think it gets the right feel, or close to it, and is relative, and it should still be balanced against other weapons. But I think that basically covers it. I think we're pretty much out of time, Eric, tonight.
I think so, yes.
So do you have any last thoughts on deaths and player character deaths that we haven't touched on yet?
That we haven't touched on, no. I just can't stress enough that a player character death should be awesome. It should be last man in the bridge, or holding against impossible odds to save his friends, family, insert thing here. And that's the way it should be.
And my last thought is, as I said, as a general rule of thumb, player character death should be meaningful. It should have meaning. And if it's going to happen, you need to talk to the players about it. But other than that, their deaths most of the games I've run, their deaths should be both awesome, or at least cinematic, and definitively, or at very least have real meaning.
Unless you're playing Cyberpunk, in which case the schmucko gang member with a 38, you should entirely have the chance to cap you in the head, because it's Cyberpunk and stupid random death is part of the deal.
Yeah, again, I'm not talking about all games. I'm talking about these are based on my experiences and the types of games I run. Your mileage will vary, and there are genres where death is supposed to be more random and such.
Yeah.
I'm just not a fan of those myself.
I really like those games. Asterisks. Done well, they're really fun. Done poorly, they're the most frustrating things ever.
Yep. But I think that wraps things up for tonight, guys. Just as again, programming note, Surly Grognards will be airing Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. going forward due to scheduling changes for me and Eric. So that's we'll be airing every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern here on my stream. You can find the recordings of the show on my blog, mechagm.blogspot.com. You can find all the previous episodes there. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for show topics, you can either comment on the blog, or you can email us at surlygrognards@yahoo.com. That's spelled surlygrognards@yahoo.com. You can find me on Twitter at mechagm. You can also find me on Facebook and Google+, Peter Bowman there. You can find Eric's work as the artist on the webcomic Boston Arcanum. That's at bostonarcanum.com.
Also, new page.
Oh, new page is up. New page is up, guys. Sweet. So I think that covers everything. We'll be back next week. I think next week we're probably going to be talking about sandbox-style games versus more directed games. That's, I think, the putative topic we're going to talk about. Eric and I'm going to nosh it out over the week, but that's sort of where we're going, I think.
It's kind of like what we're thinking right now, and it may change as we stop thinking about it.
Or as we talk about during the week. So, other than
Actually,
that, guys...
holy crap, tons of pages. Akeem was busy.
Awesome. So, thanks, guys, for watching. For everybody who was here watching live and in the chat, thank you for watching. And for those of you who watched the recording, I hope you enjoyed it and found everything useful, or at least helpful, or at least entertaining in some way. We'll be back next week. So that's, for me, that's Peter Bowman, and for my good friend, for Eric here, wish you all good night and happy gaming. Say good night, Eric.
Have fun, humans. We'll see you a lot later.